The Vizio OLED is finally here, and it promises OLED picture quality at a lower price than the LG and Sony OLEDs out there. So it's time for some testing and comparisons. So in this video we're going to test and compare it to the Samsung Q90T QLED just to see how well it performs in comparison. Stick around. Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech. Now this video is the comparison of the Vizio OLED versus the Samsung QLED, but I'll also be comparing it to the LG OLED just to see if you trade any picture quality for that lower intro price. So there are a lot more videos to come. So many videos, so little time. Now some notes before we begin. Both TVs will be in their most accurate picture mode, and this will be a direct comparison. They're both being fed the exact same signal from a Panasonic UB820 Blu-ray player that's then split through a Denon X4700H receiver. So all the differences you see will be a direct result of the TVs themselves. But let's get into the video because I'm sure you didn't come here to see my mug, so let's get into it. Before we get into the actual video comparison, we'll do some test patterns, and this first one up is a test of tone mapping. Now the source is set to a max of 2000 nits, so everything beyond the TV's native peak brightness it will have to tone map, and the Vizio is the first TV I've actually seen to tone map each square correctly. From the darkest to the brightest, there is differentiation between each segment. There's no differentiation between the two brightest points on the screen on the Samsung, so it doesn't tone map as well as the Vizio does in this instance. Next we'll have a test of static point brightness elements, and as we can see on the Samsung, it is much dimmer than it is on the Vizio. So because of the way Samsung manages its full array local dimming backlight in this instance, it doesn't result in blooming, but what it does result in is a much dimmer picture, much dimmer than it's supposed to be. This next full field gray test of panel uniformity shows that both panels are pretty clean and have no panel uniformity issues like dirty screen effect or excess brightening or darkening of the corners. Next up is a test that is pretty difficult for an LCD TV, the star field test. Now this has a lot of point brightness elements moving across the screen, so it often wreaks havoc on the backlight of an LCD TV, and that is also the case with the QLED. We can also see that the stars are not as bright on the Samsung as they are on the Vizio, and this could be an indication of black crush, which is losing some detail in the darker areas of the screen. This next test is what I like to call the running peppers test, and it consists of bright peppers moving across the screen on a dark background, which is also a difficult test for an LCD TV, and it results in a lot of blooming as the objects move across the screen. The OLED on the other hand has no such issues, but what it does have is the appearance of judder because of the way that OLEDs handle motion. In this next tunnel transition test, we can see where the Vizio performs extremely well again with its tone mapping. Next up is a test of banding in the quantization test, and as you can see on the 8-bit sources there is some banding taking place on both TVs, but they both handle 10-bit sources very well and have no banding. Next up is a test of how well both TVs maintain their peak brightness as the size of the window increases. And the QLED actually has the most fluctuations in brightness as the size of the windows increase as different backlight zones are activated. The OLED on the other hand maintains a more consistent peak brightness as the window size increases. But it will not do that forever as the auto brightness limiter will kick in after a while if the average scene brightness is too bright for too long. Now let's look at the motion handling of both of these TVs. 24 frames per second content pull down is handled very well and there are no motion issues like judder. Now we'll test both TVs' ability to enhance and smooth fast-moving motion, and both TVs do a good job smoothing the motion with motion smoothing enabled, but there are more artifacts on the Vizio than there are on the Samsung, notably on the edges of objects. The Samsung Q800T still has the best motion enhancement I've seen so far this year. Now let's get into the video comparison. Although they both look rather similar on camera, in person the OLED is a lot more contrasty and there is a lot more definition between the brighter and darker elements on screen. Now of course, let's compare them a little closer. And we can see that even though they're both getting the exact same signal at the exact same time, the transitions happen on the Samsung faster than they do on the Vizio because Vizio has a higher input lag. Note that areas on the screen which seem overblown are actually not overblown in person, but get so bright that the camera has a difficult time capturing all that brightness and results in some clipping of the image. The increased contrast of the OLED also helps it to have a higher perceived saturation than the QLED does. The colors on the QLED are still quite vivid, however, and the overall brightness is still higher than the OLED as one would expect. But that said, the Vizio does get pretty bright. The Vizio can also get even brighter if you increase the tone mapping setting from its default 50 to 100, which increases the OLED light output. But it's unclear if that would actually have any effect on the overall life of the panel. In this scene, to better highlight the differences in black level performance, I increased the exposure of the camera to better illustrate how much blooming is happening on the QLED. As a result, brighter objects on screen will appear overblown, but they're not overblown in person. And if we again put them even closer together, then we can see the differences in black level performance even more. Since pixels on an OLED TV light up on an individual basis, then there will be no blooming occurring in a high contrast, challenging scene like this one. In this clip, we'll compare how the picture changes on both TVs when they're both switched to game mode. Now on the left is movie mode, while on the right of the screen will be game mode. And as we can see on the Samsung, there is an increased brightness in the midtones while the overall contrast is lower. While on the Vizio, the brightness is similar but the contrast is lower. The colors on both of them though are as vivid in game mode as they are in movie mode, if not more so. Now, some interesting observations throughout the comparison. Now, the Samsung has a lower input lag than the Vizio because the scenes will transition faster on the Samsung than they do on the Vizio, just by a hair, but it did happen. Now, the Samsung has the brighter picture, but everything from contrast to perceived saturation to overall HDR pop, I think the Vizio has it beat. And while the Samsung only supports HDR10, HDR10 Plus, and hybrid log gamma, the Vizio also supports every one of those, as well as Dolby Vision. So it has the entire slate of HDR formats covered. The Vizio also has two HDMI 2.1 ports, while the Samsung only has one. So if you have two next-gen consoles, you'll be able to connect them both to their individual HDMI ports and not have to worry about switching inputs or finding a splitter for that matter. But we'll talk more about gaming in the comparison that's yet to come. Yeah, I know, a lot of comparisons. Both TVs also have excellent off-axis picture quality. The Samsung does very well for an LED backlit LCD TV, while the Vizio does well because that's an inherent benefit of the OLED technology. The Q90 also has a screen coating which gives it really good ambient light rejection, while the Vizio does not, so the screen is a bit more reflective. But that all changes in a dark room or nighttime viewing because the OLED picture is that much more contrasty. But let me know your thoughts about these TVs or the comparison in the comments below, and if you want to check them out some more or even buy one, then I've also left links in the description. So the gaming comparison should be live in the next couple days, and the comparison with the LG OLED should be live in the coming week, so make sure to come back for that. Make sure you're subscribed. But until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood Villaman saying be safe and peace.